All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Terry Schaefer, and I serve as the government chair for the Evolving the Workforce Community of Interest. And I'm really happy to welcome all of you here today to our second virtual event. We held our last one in early April. We had a few technical difficulties, but ACT-IAC has transitioned to this new platform, and hopefully we'll be clear sailing today using this technology. So. I just wanted to share with everyone and remind everyone that there are plenty of opportunities to participate in our COI. There are a lot of volunteer opportunities, either serving in leadership roles and getting involved with projects, various committees. And so there are plenty of opportunities. We send them out, ACT-IAC sends out notifications to the membership when there are opportunities to volunteer. We also have ACT-IAC's big conference, which is coming up in the fall, Imagination ELC. And one of the threads of the conference is workforce and culture. And so we were involved last year in helping to develop sessions or provide information on sessions where workforce can be woven into the various themes and topics. So there are lots of chances to get involved. If you do have an interest, please reach out to Nancy Delanoche. Her email is in the email notification for today's meeting. And you can also reach out to me directly or Andrew McCoy, our industry chair, and we'd be happy to share more about what those opportunities look like. But I know from all of us who are involved in the organization, involved in our COI, it's really a really rewarding experience, both personally and professionally. And there are many ways where you can really tie it into the work that you are doing on a daily basis. So please reach out and look for those communications from ACT-IAC when volunteer opportunities exist. So I will now turn it over to Austin, our program chair, to kick off today's meeting, introduce our speakers, and cover a few housekeeping items for the meeting today. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Terry, for the great introduction. So as Terry mentioned, my name is Austin Crittenden, and I am the program chair for our COI. We want to give everyone a huge thank you for attending. We have a fantastic and compelling program for you today. And we are together going to learn a lot today, thanks to our speakers. I want to give a quick shout out to our fantastic program team. We have a group that helps put this together just specifically for the program. That includes Rana Garrett, Dr. Vij, Amy Paris, and Fatima Akhtar. These individuals really helped to make this possible. We really appreciate your help. So I want to be brief so we can get you to our excellent speakers. I do want to give a heads up first about our event for next month, so you can save it on the calendar. And then I'll go into housekeeping and we'll go straight to the speakers. So in June, on June 11th, and it's now up on our website, we have a seminar titled Fair and Effective Hiring, Are Different Outcomes Possible?, which will be a frank conversation led by two impressive speakers, Stephanie Grosser, who is and I wish I had this title, she has the title of bureaucracy hacker at the U.S. Digital Service, and Kim Holden, who is a Deputy Associate Director of Talent Acquisition and Workforce Shaping at the Office of Personnel Management. They will provide insight into efforts to reform the hiring process, of which they've had a lot of involvement in leadership. They'll speak to what works within the law and what does not, while focusing on outcomes and not bureaucracy. So I think it'll be a fantastic session, June 11th. Add it to your calendar. It'll be fantastic. So I just wanted to give a heads up about that. Before we get to the speakers, quickly on housekeeping, we want your feedback. We want your questions. We want your thoughts. We'd love to hear your questions. So there's two ways to do this. There's a chat box in Zoom. You can submit your questions. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. We have two speakers. After they provide their presentation, we'll take your questions. So submit your questions by chat. Also, we'll open up the phone lines, so to speak, on Zoom if you'd like to voice your question. So we'll allow it both ways. But we really do encourage you to use the chat box as well, because it's very, I guess, administratively convenient for us. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. I think I mentioned that. And I think it's time to introduce our speakers. So today's subject for our presentation is what makes a good federal IT leader. To help answer this question, we will hear from two federal experts on this subject. The first, Dr. Carlise Kelly, who is the Chief Learning Officer at the USDA, will speak to her experience leading a Senior Executive Service Candidate Development Program for the CIO Council. And she will speak to both how that program was set up and also the core principles of leadership development from the perspective of someone who has built this and led this type of program. She has a wealth of experience as a thought leader of federal talent development programs and has built multiple programs that span across agencies. She will be our first presenter, and she will be followed by her colleague, Ted Kouk, who is the Chief Data Officer at USDA. He will provide the other side of the coin because he is a participant in a SES candidate development program. He will be able to speak about what it's actually like being in the program and to what it's like to focus on as an individual, developing those leadership skills and expertise as a participant of the program. And so hopefully we will be able to provide you a 360 view on leadership development for federal leaders, what it takes, and how it's actually done. So I do not want to keep you guys from our speakers any longer. So without any further delay, I am honored to introduce our first presentation with Dr. Carlise Kelly.
Hello, Austin, and hi, everyone. It's great to have you join us today to hear a little bit about our topic, which is what makes a good IT leader. We're going to talk about the first ever groundbreaking Chief Information Officer Council, SES Candidate Development, which is what makes an IT leader. We're going to talk about the C on that next slide is a little bit of background of how we got to this program. I'm wondering if Nancy's having trouble advancing the slides. There we go. Thank you. So as background, GAO did a report in 2018 on actions to address critical shortcomings that had to do with the Chief Information Officer's role. One of the things that they concluded that Chief Information Officers, or CIOs, at least 3 to 5 years if they want to show results on some of the complex and multifaceted projects that they're actually presented and discussed. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming in better now, but I think there was a gap before. There may be a connection issue on your end, but we can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay, good. So the GAO report was discussed at a meeting with federal CIOs, and I think that they realized that leadership development is really a very important thing that they need to pay attention to. Succession planning, talent development, it really is extremely important. And then shortly after that, the President's Management Agenda came out with the cross-agency priority goal about developing the workforce of the 21st century. This did capture the thoughts of the CIO Council, and they initiated several different projects related to workforce development and workforce training, and this is one of their projects. So if we want to go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit more of the background. They decided that they wanted to do an SES candidate development program, we shorten call it SES CDP. This is an OPM approved competitive training program. It's actually has regulations that you have to meet in order to do this program. We'll talk a little bit about the details of what the program consists of. But the goal is, after people participate in this program, they are eligible to submit materials to be certified as senior executives. And once they do that, they can be placed, participants can be placed non-competitively in executive positions. These programs may be open to the public. We're required to advertise these positions on USA Jobs, these programs. So you have to read when they're announced to see if they are open only to federal employees or open to the public. I personally been involved in managing, this is my fourth SES CDP program to manage across 10 years, and several of them we did open to the public. The training program is really designed to address something called executive core qualifications. So let's go to the next slide and we'll see a little bit more about what that means. The executive core qualifications, if you're not familiar with them, there's 5 basic ECQs is what they're called. Leading change, leading people, driving results, having business acumen, and being able to build coalitions, not just within your work group, but within your organization and across multiple organizations. So these are the skills that have been identified that are important for executives in the federal government to have. And each of these ECQs altogether have a total of 28 competencies. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. You might say, well, why do I care about these ECQs? Well, first of all, they're the basis for selecting people into the SES CDP, and they're also the basis for selecting people into the Senior Executive Service. For those people who are appointed to Senior Executive Service, they become the basis for your performance evaluations. So they kind of carry through. They're a theme that carries through all of the Senior Executive Service, from training all the way to performance. So let's go to the next slide. And in this slide, what you'll see is a picture of how those 28 competencies play out across the whole leadership development spectrum. You got at the very bottom something called fundamental competencies. These are the competencies every single person in the federal government should master. But they're still important, maybe just at a broader level as an executive. For example, managing yourself. If executives get up in the morning and they have trouble managing themselves, that's an issue. They really should have mastered that, and it shouldn't be something that is something that they're working on at the executive level. But you can see the competencies that are needed for leading a team, which is like a stepping stone for becoming a supervisor, formal supervisor to lead people, and then to become a manager. And in the federal programs, managers typically supervise supervisors, but they're really responsible for managing a program, a lot of times a program at a national level, or at least at an agency level. And then finally, there's a small set of competencies that people feel that you really develop more as you move into the executive level. But all of these competencies are coming into play on a daily basis, and they are the basis for this SES CDP. So let's go on to the next slide. And what you'll see there is a little bit of information about the program itself. I say thanks to the Federal Chief Information Officers Council for deciding to do this program. I think it is a really, really important program, not just for today, but for the future. As we start to live in this world where we're more and more dependent on IT, and IT is such a foundation for government services, government service delivery. Leaders in government are more important than ever. I think all of us have had experiences where, unfortunately, maybe you have a leader that is not particularly motivating or engaging, not particularly inspiring. We want this program is designed to develop really good, strong leaders who can inspire their employees. So they're better problem solvers. They're better at anticipating and dealing with changes. They're better working as a team. They're more innovative. And the Federal Chief Information Officers Council could see how important leaders for the future would be. The goal we had was to select 20 people to participate in this program. And it is a history-making program. There have been plenty of other SES CDPs for agencies. Some have been multi-agency, but there has never been a council-sponsored SES CDP. So I'm very proud to be part of this groundbreaking program. And one of the first things we had to do is we had to establish an executive resources board that was made up of members from the council. So the board that we have has USDA, Department of Defense, Department of Labor, GSA, and Nuclear Regulatory Commission, a really nice mix of different kinds of organizations. We've got their CIOs that really look at overseeing the entire program. So they came from the council and they go back to the council. If we can go on to the next slide, we'll see some of the basic features of an SES CDP program. As I mentioned, you can't just decide today that you want to do a program like this. It has to be, you have to have a written program that you submit to the Office of Personnel Management, and they review it and approve it. And I can tell you, even though I've been involved in several of these programs, we went back and forth several times on some of the things that we were planning, and eventually got to an approved program. I'm very pleased too that the CIO Council selected USDA to be the group that implemented this program. And I think that maybe there were two reasons why they decided to go with USDA. And one is that we do have a reputation of doing some really good cross-agency SES candidate development programs. And we have a very strong CIO who's been involved in leading IT transformation in this administration, who was on the council. So the program that is possible under the regulation that governs SES CDPs, you can have a program as short as 12 months, or as long as 2 years. I've done some 2-year programs. It gives people more time during the program to grow and develop. But at the same time, any participant in the program continues to stay in their current position. So it is, from a perspective, it's a bit of a longer haul to do a program. And we chose the 12-month program right now due to the timing of where we are in the cycle of an administration. We know that it's just from history, as 1 4-year cycle of an administration comes to an end, it's a lot of times the time when a lot of executives decide they have done their duty, they have finished their projects. Maybe this is a good time to get off the merry-go-round and retire. And that opens up opportunities for new, people to be appointed. So given that cycle, we felt that the 12-month program was the best way to go. As I mentioned, people can, in this case, our program was open only within the civil service, people who are federal employees. And the thinking there was that we believed that we would draw plenty of qualified candidates for 20 seats in this program. The program is required by regulation to have at least 80 hours of interagency executive level training. Our program is exceeding that. Participants are required to have an executive mentor, and we got a lot of volunteers from the CIO Council to serve as mentors. It's got to include assessments. Our program includes a 360 assessment at the start of the program, and then at the end of the program, so the candidates themselves, as well as we, can see some information about how they grow and develop. And then probably the last feature that may be one of the most unique features of the program is 120-day developmental detail. And that means that candidates must leave their position of record and go and spend some time in ideally an executive level position. Could be a vacant SES position, could be a special project that might, be at an executive level. And it could be done at their own home agency or another agency, or it even could be done in the private sector, nonprofit sector. So we encourage candidates to look at doing their detail in an area that they want to strengthen. They've got to be bold. They've got to be aware, self-aware of where they're strong and where they need to improve. This is a great opportunity to be bold and go someplace that you don't have a strong area so you can develop. For example, if you feel, in this case, many of these candidates are pretty strong, they will be strong in IT issues, they might want to go to a financial office. They might want to go to a human resources office or some kind of really customer-facing type of function. So we'll go on to the next slide. And what you'll see there is that what we did to get this program going and the process that we used to select the candidates. First, we did a pre-announcement outreach. We wanted to let the GS-14s and 15s who are eligible to apply to know about this. So we shared a pre-announcement with the CIOs and the Chief Information Security Officers, CISOs. If you didn't already know, the CIO Council is a council that is actually established in regulation. It has formal relationships with GSA. CISO Council is similar to the Chief Learning Officers Council in that it is not established in a formal regulation, but the people who are in these positions meet voluntarily for the good of the community. So we did also engage the CISOs because we feel like information security, cybersecurity, all of that is important in terms of leadership and IT issues. As I mentioned, we're required to announce it publicly in USA Jobs for fairness. Our HR team reviewed the applications to find the groups that were best qualified. And phase one of our selection process, we had an executive panel representing a variety of different agencies on the council. They were trained on reviewing the resumes. We asked for ECQ-based resumes. This is basically the way that OPM has gone towards selecting senior executives, is asking people to submit ECQ-based resumes. So that was phase one of our selection process. And going on to the next slide, you'll see, in addition to the ECQ-based resume, we asked our candidates who were applying for this opportunity to answer one of the two technical questions. This one was our question for people in the IT background in general. And if you go on to the next slide, you'll see we also had one that we asked for people who had a background in security operations. We wanted to be sure that we had a balance of people. We'd exclude one of these groups. Going on to the next slide, what you'll see is that we had a very good number of people who applied for the program, 486, which is typical. This is typical for a lot of programs. Not everyone who applies is actually qualified. Only 55% of those people who applied were qualified, but we still had a very good number of people, about 73% interested in being a CIO and about 27% in the CISO role. So going on to the next slide, you'll see that we had another step in our selection process, which was to actually conduct some structured interviews. That was our second phase of the selection process. So a structured interview it's a certain type of interview where every candidate gets a set of questions, same set of questions with standardized scoring options. And this, in this case, the questions were based around the ECQs. We also asked applicants to submit something called supervisory endorsements. This endorsement was one way for us to be sure that the supervisor of the applicant knew they were going to be participating in this program, that they would be able to be free to go on the developmental detail, and that the supervisor is making a commitment across 2 fiscal years to support this person, even though the CIO Council paid for the program. So the supervisors in this case would not be paying for the program. So once we had those structured interviews and those, the Executive Resources Board met to look at the data of the scores and make the final class selection. Going to the next slide, you'll see that we met our goal. We had 21 people who were selected, and they were selected from 11 different departments, which is really great. If you look at that list of departments, every one of them is so important in terms of delivering services to the public through IT types of applications. We also had a good balance of candidates, 71% who were interested in the CIO roles and 29% interested in the security roles. So going on to the next slide, that was in November. And beginning in January, our applicants, our participants now, they are beyond applicants, they're participants, they're going into the training that was required as part of the program. We looked at several, 3 or 4 different providers in terms of finding the right provider for training for this program. And we selected the American University Key Executive Leadership Development Program for the training. It is customized around the ECQs. They have also further customized some of their content. You can see some of the examples about the content that they're trying to get across to our candidates. We're not, as you can see, if we're doing our program, our training around the ECQs, we are using some examples and content in the IT world, but this program is not to strengthen technical skills, as I mentioned. These candidates, they already have really strong technical skills. Their program is really to work on their leadership skills. As I mentioned, we want strong leaders who can engage and encourage and show vision to their staffs to create a great environment for problem solving, for innovation. And this is exactly what the Key Leadership Program is designed to do. And it is really designed to take people from a strong technical leader into an executive leader posture through a transformational program. So the program isn't easy. It requires people to actually make some changes in the way that they work in a fundamental way. As you can imagine, a person who's really great at delivering results may need to learn about how to work with a team that's not so great and help them become a lot better at delivering results. That's a totally different skill set. So that's what this program is designed to do. Going on to the next slide. These candidates were about halfway through the program at this point, and it's time for them, some of them, about half of them, are in their developmental details. As I mentioned earlier, it has to be 120 days where they're away from their home agency. It should give them some experience at the executive level. And we encourage them to be bold and brave and go someplace to do something that they don't have much experience in. So that's what we've been asking them to do, and their mentor can help them. We've also received some opportunities that people are interested in. Netta Grant, she is USDA's representative to the CIO Council working group on workforce, and Netta has also been really instrumental in this program, sharing information with American University professors about what IT topics they would like to have covered as examples, and helping to get some details at different agencies so that candidates have options. I think that you would think that it's possible that trying to do a detail in a time of COVID might be a little challenging. Maybe Ted can speak to that in a few minutes. But we are finding that our candidates are finding details. They're going to the details and being successful. And then, as I mentioned, it doesn't have to be a detail in the federal government. They could look outside. They could look at nonprofits, private sector. We advise them in those cases. There's some ethics things they have to consider, but it is certainly a possibility. So going on to the next slide, our next steps, the candidates will they'll finish their training in September, and the program will be over, the 1-year mark will be up in November. And so they'll be graduating from the program at that point. They'll be preparing a package of materials that describe all the things they've learned and the leadership experience that they've gained. And that will be reviewed by our Executive Resources Board. And then it will go to the Office of Personnel Management for review. And then the next slide is, finally, our short-term goal is that we want these candidates to become certified senior executives. I've told them that if you become certified as a senior executive, it's like a diploma. Your SES certificate is something that you own. It's yours. No one can take it from you. That means that you're ready for non-competitive placement into executive level positions, leadership positions. So for example, a vacancy comes up at USDA and they look at all the list of possible candidates. They can pick somebody and fill that position within a short time frame. They may want to interview people, talk to people. That is just something that could be expected if they don't have familiarity with these candidates. But they'll be ready, and likely they will. There's tiers in the executive level, sort of like an entry level, a mid-level, and a senior level. Senior is the actual CIO level. So it's likely that these candidates would go into more of a entry-level position, but it would depend on their experience. It's possible that they could go into, say, a CIO position, a top-level position at a small agency right off the bat. So we're excited about that. And then long-term, and that, we believe that that will happen slowly over time. Long-term, what we'd like to see is every single one of these 21 candidates being placed in executive positions to serve as strong and talented IT leaders. I tell them when I'm retired and I'm relying on IT security and, my ability to, as a citizen, simply just to engage with the government, I'll be thinking of them and appreciating the work that they do. I see we have some questions in the chat. But I don't know. One question was, when would it be back on USA Jobs? Well, we don't really know if the CIO Council will decide to do another one of these programs. This was a pilot. I hope that they will. Other agencies may be deciding to do a program like this. So I would say if you have a USA Jobs account, just look for SES CDP vacancy announcements. They do come up. I know, for example, Homeland Security, they're such a big department. They do an SES CDP every year, or they have been doing one. So you kind of have to monitor USA Jobs. I'm not aware of any in the pipeline at the moment. Were there any GS-14 selected? I'm trying to remember. I don't remember, but certainly once they apply, it's like the grade level is not what's looked at. It's the breadth and depth of your experience. So for example, if you're thinking about writing your own ECQs, to the extent that you can talk about your experiences that with projects that reach across your agency or across departments, regardless of whether you're a 14 or a 15, those are the ones that are going to be most competitive for this program. experiences where you're talking about what you did within your own working group or within your own component are not viewed as strong. So if you can gain experience at a agency-wide, national-wide, interdepartmental-wide type of experiences will be the ones that are best to highlight. And so the criteria for civilians or for for people who are non-federal are very much the same. Same competencies, the same issues of breadth and depth. It's just something I'd say, do a little research on the executive core qualifications, and those are the things to highlight. And even if you're going to have some skills at vision or strategic thinking, even as a civilian, you're going to have some experiences with leading major change efforts. All of that, same criteria, nothing different for feds or civilians. And right now, in terms of have any of our candidates gone on details outside of the government, not from this program. We have another program that we're managing just within USDA, and quite a few people did go out to do some details with nonprofit organizations. So we only have about half of our people on details now, so it's possible that some of them may still choose to do a detail outside of government. Okay, Austin, I think this wraps up my description of the program.
Fantastic. So we will thank you, Dr. Kelly, for the fantastic presentation. We will pass now to Ted Karuk, who is the Chief Data Officer at the USDA, and he will speak to his experience growing as a leader and his experience making the next steps as a candidate within the SES development program. And so without further delay, Ted Karuk.
Good morning, everyone. Can I just do a quick mic check, make sure everyone can hear me, and or a thumbs up?
I can hear you.
Good. Great to be here with everyone, and nice to be able to connect with everyone virtually as we're all making some adjustments to our work and life. I was actually in training this week with the SES CDP candidates from across the government, and obviously we've been adjusting our own training through virtual and online, and the workforce is, the federal workforce is relying on a lot of remote collaborative technologies to be able to continue doing work. And so I think that's going to create some adaptive change within the workforce, and also inform how we implement our technologies to support situations like this. But nice to be with you. Just as an aside, I don't know who is more brave, myself or my wife. I actually was preparing for this session and was letting her know I had to go talk to a bunch of people, and I was looking a little shaggy. So you're actually looking at a COVID-19 home haircut. So I think she did a nice job, but everyone's making these adjustments. So I wanted just to share, I guess, my personal thoughts on the program. It was great to hear the perspective of Carlise with her expertise in designing these programs over a number of years. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my background and personal philosophy on development, and just the experience so far as we're about halfway through this first CIO CISO CDP program. So I actually started my career in the Navy as a surface warfare officer, and I did that for a number of years in different roles. Got out of the military, went back to grad school for a number of years, and And then I've been at USDA since about 2011, where I've had a number of roles in different mission areas, but also working a lot with the departmental CIO, and then in my most recent role. So my own sort of career development, I know different folks have different ways of engaging with that. In my own personal experience, it's been one of finding the right place at the right time, and finding leaders that I could work with who I really trusted and believed in, and using that as an opportunity to learn from them. I didn't really chart out my career path, and it's gone in unexpected directions, which has been, for me, really rewarding. But I do really believe deeply in this notion that leadership is a lifelong skill, competency, development opportunity. And I think one of the really fascinating things that we've learned over the last couple of decades about just human development in general is that people have the ability to continue to develop mental complexity and emotional intelligence in various different ways, not only in their teens and young adult and 20s, but really through their entire life. 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, people still are and have the ability to continue to develop and grow, which is a really amazing fact about human beings. It's also true that folks can get stuck in ruts for months, years, decades in some cases. And so that's also, a sad aspect of that as well. So I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight about this program is, as Carlise was going through all of the different components, I think that together, a kind of a program like this is greater than the sum of its parts in how it's thinking about leadership development and human development. And there's a couple of aspects of that. But I think, fundamentally, one of the things that I think is important, and Carlise was showing the various competencies and self-management being the one that kind of runs along the bottom across all areas, all levels. If you're going to lead organizational change, which is extremely hard, if you can't change yourself, you can't change, and changing yourself is really also very hard. And so the reason these programs are so comprehensive is because they understand that. There's this concept of something called the immunity to change. And it's really based on this idea that we have something like an immune system that we've developed, all of us individually in our own ways, that is protecting us from danger, and it's based on our previous experiences. And while it's really effective at doing that, it also creates barriers for personal growth and development, and it filters the information and sort of how we see the world in such a way that if you're unable to recognize that, often it will stand in your way. So you may have a goal for yourself, a behavioral change, but there may be some underlying belief or way that you're viewing the world that's going to make it really hard for you to achieve that goal, or maybe that's not even the right goal. And so I think just understanding that idea of the immune system, that it's protecting you, but it also creates this immunity to change, is really what these programs are designed to help leaders grow through. And I think, again, these are things that I think that folks should seek out opportunities to do even outside of these programs, but they are a really good opportunity for that. So before I talk just about the program, I will say that in one of my roles at USDA, we had done some experimentation with these kinds of development programs. And one of the programs that we started when I was working as the chief of staff for the CIO at USDA was a department-wide. We have 19 agencies, a very diverse mission, everything from managing our national forests and wildfire to our supplemental nutrition assistance program, to loans and grants to farmers, and really just a number of other mission components that are very complex and different in a lot of ways. But we have IT specialists who are supporting each and every one of those missions. And we had similar desire to create opportunities for the workforce to grow and develop. And so we had a program they put in place for GS-12s through 14s originally, but I think it's 15s now as well, and it's in its 6th year. And the idea there was similar to this program, although not for SES and development, was to focus on these executive core competencies. And in that case, we worked with the Partnership for Public Service, and it's it's still in existence, but it's really been powerful for people to have these rotations, this classroom learning, these 360-degree surveys, and also the opportunity to work on projects collaboratively. So that's something that I've had some experience with. So I was really excited and fortunate to be able to participate in this program. And so I think I'll just go through a couple of the aspects that we've had so far, as we're about halfway through. So I think first you're getting the 360-degree survey, right? And you're learning a lot of things because your supervisor and your employees and your peers and others have the opportunity to provide you feedback in an anonymous way, where they know that this is going to help you see things that you might not see yourself. And so just being open to seeing some things about yourself that you might not have been aware of is another way of sort of opening up your perspective on the world, as they were talking about those filters, right? And for how we kind of process information. The other aspect of the program that I think is really valuable is the classroom learning. You gaining knowledge about the competencies that are important and various techniques and how you can engage on always with solutions focused and emotional intelligence as part of the equation. But those core competencies that Carlise mentioned. I think really important to that idea of immunity to change is that knowledge is not sufficient, right, for behavioral change. You have to really be put in situations where you're a little bit uncomfortable. So the 360-degree survey is one example of that, but also your rotations where you're put into a new context. There is this concept of something called optimal conflict, and it's defined as the persistent experience of some frustration, dilemma, life puzzle, quandary, or personal problem that is designed to cause us to feel the limits of our current way of knowing. It's just a fancy way of saying that when you're put into a problem situation that is not overwhelming you, but you can't also escape it or diffuse it, you're often forced to find new ways to think about things. And when you come on the other side of that, if you're able to persist through it, often what happens is you actually come on the other side almost like a different person, where you are seeing the world slightly differently, and your strategies and ways of thinking about things may be different. You may have had some false dichotomies where you said it's either this or that, and you actually found a third option or another way of engaging with a problem and those kinds of things. So I think the rotations where you're in those new situations, plus the classroom learning, plus the 360, all of those things together really create a recipe for kind of self-discovery and growth. And I think that's really important. But I also think it's important that this not be the end all be all, that this is something that you try to create for yourself repeatedly, because it's, while it may create some anxiety, it is something that's necessary for kind of developing. And so I think that's really, for me, the crux of what's really valuable about these programs and why I'm really glad that I have an opportunity to do it myself. So we're about halfway, as I mentioned. We're in class this week. The topic this week is financial management, business acumen. And actually next week, I will be starting my rotation where I'll be working to help stand up the first federal Chief Data Officer Council in government. So that's actually working across government with OMB and GSA and other agencies. There was a law passed about over a year and a half ago called the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Making Act, which established CDOs at each and every agency. USD had a CDO for some time before that, but officially now all agencies are required to do that in pursuit of implementing the federal data strategy, making data available both internally and externally for decision-making and for leveraging the unique power of government data. And so that'll be my opportunity to sort of step outside my day-to-day work and be able to engage in something slightly different and in a new context. And I'm looking forward to that. So I didn't want to talk for too long today. I just wanted to sort of share a few of my sort of personal thoughts on it. I think one other aspect that I just didn't mention that I'll just bring up at the end here is this idea of building bridges with leaders across government. So this is a good opportunity in this particular program, is that we're all facing a lot of common challenges with what's going to happen after this COVID situation with federal budgets and where we'll be and how we're going to modernize and try to continue to deliver the mission. And so we're building this cohort of network that we'll be able to rely upon, not just in the program, but following that. And I think that's something at the USDA IT Fellows Program where people have also built these networks that are really good ways of sharing information. So I think that's one thing that's unique about the CIO CISO program is that we're all working in different contexts, but we have a lot of the same challenges. And that's going to be, I think, a powerful thing for years to come. So I wanted to thank Carlise in particular for making this program happen, and the CIO Council, of course. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And I do see a question about, does my wife take appointments, which I almost laughed out loud when I was trying to talk to, so appreciate it.
Thank you, Ted. And I know that we had one question from Leslie about the cost for these programs. Before we open up the lines to call-in questions, perhaps we should answer that one. So Dr. Kelly, Ted, what are your thoughts about Leslie's question?
I can answer the question right now. In some SES CDP programs, and managing agency, like in this case, USDA is managing the program, they would charge an administrative fee, but we're not doing that. But it is something that could be expected. The other cost is really the training. And, the training is, the cost of the training was borne by the CIO Council for the participants. American University's training is actually on the GSA MOBIS contract. I hope that contract is still, that may be may have transitioned to a different name for that contract, but it's one of those kinds of contracts that people go through a process with GSA, a validation process, and then it's available government-wide. So I can tell you that, as I mentioned, it's in excess of 180 days that's required. It also comes with participants get, if they would like to go on to earn a Master of Public Administration, they can do that. They have to take additional courses on their own to supplement what they get through the American University program. But the program is very reasonably priced. I don't remember off the top of my head. I want to say maybe $8,000 per person. It's significantly less than a lot of other programs and provides some additional value like the Masters of Public Administration or graduate level credit that really isn't required. Plus it is on the GSA MOBIS. But any agency, if you're going to, the cost would be in the USA Jobs announcement. It's going to be included, and that cost could vary depending on what agency chooses to do with training. So I would say if you look in the future for opportunity, see that cost, it'll be posted in the announcement.
Fantastic. And we also have a question from Howard about the time commitment for the program, if you guys could speak to that.
So it's, I guess, is a question of, are we talking about time commitment in terms of commitment to government service? Maybe Carlise could talk about that. I would say that the commitment in terms of time for participation in the program, if I would just take that interpretation of the question, is pretty significant, right? There's, depending on the program that you're in, it's between 6 and 8 weeks of classroom training. And then of course you have the rotation. There's the readings, the work you're doing there as well. And so it's a pretty significant investment from leadership to have someone participate in the program, not only in terms of the cost, but it's also in terms of the time commitment. I think the reason that leaders who understand this development opportunity will see it as a really big return on investment is because they know what's really required to develop in these kinds of ways. And it does take that kind of investment and commitment to be able to make some of the gains that the government really needs. And so I think that's one of the reasons you'll see that despite that time commitment, organizations are really invested in giving those opportunities to people. If it's on the commitment for government service, however, I think maybe Carlise can answer that one.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. And I also tell people that when you have someone participating in this program from your team, it's not just an opportunity for them to develop, but while they're on their developmental detail, there'll be an opportunity for perhaps somebody else, at least one or two, or maybe more than that, other people to serve in an acting role, and they get some development as well through that process. In terms of service beyond the training, I believe that we had a continuing service agreement for this group that said that they would serve 2 years in federal service beyond this training. That is, there's a formula that goes into that, but I don't think that's an unreasonable commitment, especially considering that we're hoping these people will move into senior executive positions. And based on what the GAO study said, right back to the very beginning of this presentation, they said 3 to 5 years in an executive level position is really what was needed to be effective. So, we're not, I don't think we're asking for too much in terms of commitment beyond the training.
Okay, and also we had a follow-up question from Howard about, do you need to be taken out of your current role in order to participate in the program?
No. In fact, what I tell people, it's sort of like, it's like a bit of a preview of what the SES would be like. If you go to the airport and you're walking along and then you get on one of those people mover things, the thing, all of a sudden you feel like you're jerked into a whole new dimension as you get onto that thing. That's what going into the senior executive service is like. So I think in some ways, having people maintain their current position while they're going through training and mentoring and assessment, and they do have to go for the 120 days of their detail outside of their organization. That's when they would typically not be in their position. But for the majority of the program, they're doing the program and doing their job.
Gotcha. So we also had a question from A. O'Brien, and he asks, are candidates trained on change management skills in the program?
Yes. I don't know, Ted, have you all had that class yet?
So I don't think we had a week specifically on the change management, but it is, I think, layered throughout the entire year as we're talking about leading people, leading teams, emotional intelligence. All of those are aspects of change management. And so I think that's, and certainly even just having the opportunity to look at case studies and to talk with some of these other senior leaders at other agencies where they are leading change management efforts, as many of us are, being able to share our experiences and to talk through what's working, what's not, and also have other people be able to provide feedback and sort of as an outsider be able to maybe see things in a slightly different way. I think that's definitely been part of the overall curriculum as we've gone through this.
Mm. And I'll add a flag, I'll plant a flag to the audience to continue submitting these great questions. This is fantastic. So I will go to the next question from Lauren, who asks, are participants who are interviewed and not selected, do they receive feedback from the panel? Those who are not selected, do they get any kind of feedback?
If they request the feedback, we're happy to give it to them. One of the things that I would share with folks who made it to the interview but weren't selected, I would give them a link to a YouTube video that you could go to yourself and see. If you go out, this is how I find it every time. I search on a structured interview video. And there is a great example of a structured interview video done by Department of Defense and the Office of Personnel Management. It's not a long video, but it does tell you, you know, this is the things to think about. And it gives you some examples of interviews that are not very good, which are interviews where people really just kind of talk about something, or they're distracted, or, and you know, these are real situations. And then they give you an example of a really well done interview that follows the challenge, context, action, result model that is also embedded in ECQs. So I give them that and tell them, the research says if you just practice doing your interview one time, you improve by 50%. So seeing a really good example and practicing is a really great way of getting better. I think a lot of people don't have a lot of experience with interviews, so I say practice is the thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we have a excellent question from Justin asking about the placement rate for SES positions for those completing the program. Justin asks if there's data on, you know, roughly what the percentage is that participants who complete the program find SES positions after the program. If you guys could speak to your views on that.
I will say, you know, right now for this program, it's still in progress. We don't have the data, but we're very, very hopeful because we know there is a lot of dynamic movement in at the executive level among SES. And this program is a government-wide program sanctioned by a council. We're really optimistic that this program may have one of the highest placement rates of any SES CDP. I've seen, I think if you look at that information on like an OPM website, you'll see some placement rates are as low as 30%. Some are much higher. At our USDA programs, we have had, you know, 50, 60% placement rate. Some things that affect your placement rate are sometimes the disciplines of people who are selected into the program are very narrow and very unique. And it's hard to place a person like that, especially if they have a certain kind of position in mind, which either may go away or they may be eligible for retirement by the time that position comes open. This is not that kind of program. This is the kind of program that we know there is going to be, you know, a demand for people with the disciplines and the backgrounds in this program. So I remain.
Hey, Dr. Kelly, I think there was a gap there in that last clause.
Well, as I said, this program, we know there's a demand for this discipline, people with this discipline, and we're really optimistic that we're going to see a high placement for this particular program. But we won't know that for several years.
And thank you to the participants who submitted the questions in a group chat. Nancy, if it works, I think it makes sense to open up the lines just in case folks have a question they'd like to ask by Zoom or by phone using audio. Is that possible to do next?
Yep, sure, absolutely. Folks can unmute themselves directly on the Zoom app.
Great. So we open it up to the audience. We have a couple of other questions by text, but if you have, we highly encourage you to ask our experts here on questions related to the topic matter.
Hi, this is Howard Spirit. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thanks. I'm of the United States coming up on my in my 6th year of service in that role. I was a little bit curious because I'm very aware of the sort of the general turnover in the population of CIOs. But in your work, have you explored what are considered successful federal CIO sort of attributes and tried to understand from you know, if you're trying to solve a problem, say of rapid turnover, what is making the relatively small minority of CIOs stick around for a bit, or are they even considered successful? It seems to me that you're focusing on solving a problem, but it doesn't jump out at me that you've, other than talking about turnover and the consequences of turnover, which I certainly agree with, how simply training people for the roles addresses stability in a role, or the ability to last in a role.
I can start, and it looks like Ted has some thoughts on that as well. You know, I think that a program like this makes an investment in a person. It helps them with their confidence. It also helps them, as Ted had mentioned, with their network in terms of being able to reach out to others and you know, maybe make changes as they see maybe that are needed in their career through the networking process. You know, as we were mentioning, the whole impetus for this program was a study by GAO, and they have the resources to do that kind of look. And their focus was on, you know, having people be in a position for a period of time. But I think the other thing is, through the selection process, we're picking people who have shown in the past that they're committed to this type of service. And I think, you know, although we don't really have data and we don't have a study at this point, I think that the information that we have shows that we're making a good investment with the program to develop people who will be successful for many years to come.
I think that was great, Carly. The other thing a couple things I would offer are, one, I think and I've had the opportunity to observe a lot of CIOs in my previous roles, and so I have a little bit of experience seeing that in terms of tenure and that kind of thing. So I think, you know, one of the things that these kind of programs help people to work through is a kind of resiliency, and I think that's really critical. It also, I think, is investing in people in areas where they need to grow and move beyond the technical skills to really a well-rounded leader, able to kind of manage through significant change, which can be really a challenge in government. So I think that's needed. I don't think it's the only you know, the only solution or the only strategy that's in place. So it's just one component. I think it's pretty well recognized that the government is often competing with the private sector for IT talent and those kinds of things. But one of the things that we really do need to do to be able to be really successful is to make sure we're training the employees we do have as we're trying to retain and recruit. We need to make sure that we're upskilling the people that we do have. And so I think that's one of the reasons that programs like this and others, like the IT Fellows program I mentioned, is part of a wider strategy to make sure we have the skills.
Thank you, Howard, for your question, and speakers for your insight. We want to continue to open it to those on the line for the next couple minutes that we have here. If anyone has any questions on the line, on Zoom, or by phone, please, we encourage you to ask while we have the experts in the audience. So, not hearing, and anyone can interject at any moment, I heard, Ted, that you mentioned immunity to change as something that came up in your leadership development. Can you speak more about that?
Sure, I can say a few things about it. To me, it's just a really interesting concept, and there's been a lot. The person who's done a lot of research in this, his name is Robert Keegan, and again, it's this idea that maybe contrary to what a lot of us learned maybe 20, 30 years ago, that we really are developing through our teens and 20s, and then sort of stop developing mentally. It's actually there's a lot of evidence now that we continue to develop through our entire lifetimes. So I think, one, that's something that people just need to know and really to kind of embrace and be really focused on how can I continue to develop. Again, it's really, the idea of immunity to change is really focused on how do we see the world and how do we filter the information based on how we're interpreting our situations. So you might be really focused on being social and kind of blending in with the group and not having yet had an opportunity to develop your own ideas about projects and initiatives and even a new way of thinking. And then you might break out of that and have that ability to kind of lead a project, but you might be filtering it from a pretty narrow perspective about those goals. Your ability to sort of look at your own filters and see the world in a new way. It's one thing to even know that that's possible. It's another thing to be able to actually do it. And I think this idea of immunity to change is getting to these underlying beliefs that we have that we may not even be conscious of, that may be holding us back. They've protected us in the past in a certain context, but when a new situation emerges, and often that happens in leadership, where a new strategy is required or a new way of engaging with people is required, you may be relying on those old models, and that might be hindering you rather than actually helping you. And even if you have a goal of where you want to be, you might not be able to change your behaviors because you might be filtering information in a way that's preventing you from seeing the problem in the right way. So that is why it is difficult to change. And that's why sort of all-in approach with things like the CDP program, but there's other ways that you can sort of design these things for yourself, right? Where you recognize, oh, this is a little bit uncomfortable. Normally our reaction is to sort of pull back and say, I don't like this and I want this to end as quickly as possible. I think sometimes if we can just recognize, you know, this is a difficult situation, but I might actually get something out of it in the end if I just kind of stick with it. Not in a way that's going to damage yourself, right? It has to be something you can manage through. But I think that's just one thing people should keep in mind is that we change. Sometimes change is hard, often it is. And there are ways that we can kind of engage in this. And these programs help with that, but it's not going to stop or start with the program either, right? It's something that you can continue to work on. So hopefully that gave a little bit of an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give Dr. Kelly an opportunity if she has thoughts about that same subject.
Well, I think that first of all, I'm really glad to hear, you know, Ted speak about this in such an articulate manner because it does show, you know, the kind of thinking that, as he mentioned, will build resilience. I know as having been a senior executive of long tenure, basically 13 years, resilience is absolutely essential. I think that it's true that at unexpected times and unexpected ways, as a senior leader, you will encounter, you know, situations where you are challenged and you do have decisions to make, whether to stay in uncomfortable positions and work through them and learn and grow and maybe even be different in some way, ideally becoming stronger and a better leader. So, you know, understanding this concept, I think, could be really important. And, you know, there's your network that you build, as Ted mentioned. I know my network, who actually have included some members of ACT-IAC, have helped me through some challenging times. Bob and Deb, have been there to help me bounce ideas off of, and that network was really important. So I think that the whole idea of immunity to change is important as a leader, to be aware of it. You can't be successful if you just pull back and say, I don't want to change. I think that you've got to be able to be a dynamic, living, vibrant thing that evolves you must evolve as a leader to be successful over time.
And as we close, I think that there's probably a lot of us in the audience, myself included, that would like to hear your insight into, if you could say one thing about what a aspiring leader should pay attention to and what they should develop in themselves, what advice would you give, given that you guys have this wealth of experience? What would you tell an aspiring leader? What should they pay attention to?
You want to say? Okay, sure. I can say a few things. I would say the best, one of the things that you can do is to try to develop some introspective habits where on a regular basis, you're trying to think about the interactions you had with people, what things went well, what kind of things triggered you, where did a conversation not go the way that you thought it might go, and just create that space for yourself to be able to have some of those reflections. And I think as part of that, just try to gain an awareness of maybe where you might have some filters that you're applying to a situation, and where maybe somebody has a different perspective. Because as you're trying to move organizations in different directions, you're going to encounter people with lots of perspectives. And it's important to be aware of what yours are, to the extent that's possible, which can be hard. But I think having a space for reflection, to me, is probably the most critical aspect of it. And as you hear, I'm not talking anything about networks or routers or switches or technology. This is all about introspection. I think if someone really wants to be able to do the kind of work that's needed for CIOs and others, that is part of the prerequisites.
So I will tag on to that and say, absolutely, my word might be just a little different, but it's a similar concept: self-awareness, being aware of what's going on inside of you, and how that actually has an impact on people around you. I was thinking many years ago, back, in maybe the 80s, when I was very early in my career, I was doing a job that involved administering national standardized tests. And there was a person who was sort of the leader who came into the room on Saturday morning with his team of people. We were all walks of life. We're here that day to administer maybe the ACT or the SAT or GMAT or LSAT. And he had a bad morning, and you could tell. And I noticed how that energy went all throughout the room on all the people who were going to be administering tests and all these little rooms in this building. And it turned out to be a horrible test day. We had all kinds of irregularities, all kinds of problems in the room. And I was like, if I did end up being the person who was managing the testing process. And I thought, doesn't matter what's happening with my day. I won't let that energy come out and create a problem, with the people, because you just don't really know where that's going to go and what's going to happen. I want to, as a leader, being self-aware, you can create the kind of energy, as I mentioned, that will help your team be the best at problem solving, at innovation, at creativity, at the kinds of things that are needed so much when you think about an organization that's thriving and performing. So it's the inside thoughts and the outside observations. I also tell people as a leader, you know, you really have to realize that you're not just yourself when you walk in a room. You have this persona. You have the persona of the leader, and people notice everything about you. They notice if you raise an eyebrow. So you don't really have to raise your voice. That's the whole thing about self-awareness, that you're purposeful in the ways that you act, in the things that you say, in you know, what you do and how you bring others together. That you're purposeful. That you're not you're inhabiting this role. You have a responsibility to do those things. So that's what I think about when I think about self-awareness.
That's fantastic. It's great that you guys both spoke to really the same theme about introspective habits. I like that phrase, and self-awareness, that there seems to be a connective tissue in leadership about humility, that it's not just about you, right? It's about, there's more involved, and it's great to hear your insights. And I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Kelly and Ted for your participation and sharing your insights with the group. This was very enlightening and very helpful, I know, to many of us, and really appreciate your providing those insights. It's been very enjoyable. I want to give a last moment to Nancy or Terry or Andrew. If I miss anything, I will give a plug on the back end here for our event next month, June 11th, save the date. It'll be a fantastic conversation about the efforts at reforming the hiring process within the federal government, and it'll be a fantastic event. But I think with that, we are right on time. Is there anything that I'm missing, Terry, Nancy, Andrew, that should be closed out with?
I think we're good. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thanks for a great event.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Fantastic.
Ted, Dr. Kelly. Really, really enjoyable hearing your insight. And just thank you for sharing your views and your experience with us for the benefit of all of us.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I got a lot out of it as well. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We will close the call, and we hope to see you in June. And thank you again for participating. We really appreciate seeing you here.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.